Hello, this is Rick W7LPN. Some family members call me Curly because we got too many Ricks in the family. I was asked to make a video over the past 20 years explaining the different emergency situations that I was involved with in ham radio where there was positive outcomes, and I agreed to do that. I said I'd be happy to do that. So I will start off with about probably 16 or 17 years ago. My wife Brooke and I, say hello, Brooke.
Hi.
We were up near Atlanta, Idaho, and we were hot springing, and we were fairly new marrieds at that time, and didn't understand the health problems that she has to a full extent, and how they affected her. So to try to keep this brief, actually it was closer to 20 years ago, because like I say, we were probably married less than a year. So up in Atlanta, Idaho, there's lots of hot springs, and we were buzzing around on our ATV and soaking in the hot springs. Well, I've got all my ham radio gear in the pickup, and suddenly Brooke starts having a grand mal seizure. Well, we haven't been married long enough for me to be comfortable about she hadn't done that yet, and I didn't know how bad that would be. So I got her secured and took care of where she was comfortable and safe, and then I got on the radio and hollered at a friend of mine that runs a net, and he was in the expected place on the expected frequency at the approximate time, and I knew I could get a hold of him. And so right away on the mobile HF radio, I get a hold of this guy, and he's in Vancouver, Washington, or just slightly north of there, and I holler at him and I tell him what's going on, and he stayed on the radio with me until I got her stable and felt it was okay to move, and he was ready to send the paramedics and the EMTs up to Atlanta, which would have been, from Boise, would have been an hour, maybe an hour and a half drive. So I got her stable and awake and feeling okay, and so I hopped in the truck, and he was still on the radio with me. So we drove all the way out of the mountains from Atlanta down through Idaho City and into Boise, and we pulled up at St. Luke's and talked about it, and she was stable and felt like she didn't need to go in, so we said we'd talk to her regular physician the next day. So it wasn't a dire emergency, but I can't tell you how much that helped, having somebody on the radio in an area where there's no way we could have reached cell phone, and walked us all the way down out of the mountains. My second incident, I was just scanning the frequencies, and I heard a desperate cry for help. I got on the radio and answered the cry for help, and it was a ship off the coast of Northern California, and he was taking on water. It was a medium-sized pleasure sailboat, and his masts were broken, and he was taking on excessive water. So I could hear the emergency communicators talking, and I interrupted their normal maritime service net on 14.300 and with emergency traffic, and they said go ahead. So I told them the guy, who he was and where he was, his approximate GPS coordinates, and I relayed back and forth to him. We stayed on that same frequency, and when I would call him and get information, I would pass it on to them, and they would tell me what to tell him. And basically they told him how to throw out his sea anchor and how to tie it onto the ship, and I repeated that information to him, and he got it stable where it didn't feel like it was going to capsize, and he could concentrate on getting water off of the ship. And then when the sun had moved far enough over the horizon, then the skip was aimed at him, and he could hear me perfectly fine, or hear them, and they took over the rest of his communication until he made landfall or got close into the harbor where he could be towed in. So that really made me feel good. And then the last one that I experienced was a young fellow, sounded like he was in his early 20s. He was out gallivanting up by the Magruder Trailhead. Is a really rugged, rough trail that goes over the mountains between Idaho and Montana. And he had mechanical problems and broke down, and way too far out for any cell communications. And it was dark. It was a weekend. There wasn't any traffic. He was on a very remote road. And he said, if you don't get a hold of my parents, I'll be out here for days. And so I was in the mountains as well, so I couldn't use a cell phone. But again, I called a friend of mine that was at home on his base station on a frequency that I knew that most likely he would be on there. And I was able to call him and get him on the phone and call this guy's parents. And they were able to know the exact location where he was, and they hopped in the truck to go save him. So those are my 3 experiences. I hope this helps anybody to understand how just a simple ham radio guy wasn't working any kind of emergency post. I was just looking for somewhere to rag chew and listening and being available and having friends available, and worked 3 different emergencies that had positive outcomes. So thank you. That's all I got for now. Bye-bye.